As a proud mother of 5 children, I'm always surprised by what my children are getting up to. Last year, my 16-year-old daughter surprised me one day by deciding to play the piano. She went to YouTube and taught herself how to do so. She just published her first book on her journey to veganism. She did all of this in less than a year because she was interested and motivated in the subject. It was relevant to her life. This is a personal story, but it's also a story about student learning. And if we are talking today about improving schools and improving education systems, we need to talk about student learning more seriously. For the last 30 years, the vast majority of educational reform efforts by governments misplaced their focus. They have focused broadly on superficial fixes to curriculum, professional development, assessment frameworks. While these things are important and necessary, they missed a place. A key missing piece of reform efforts have been the learners themselves. No one is talking about the learners' agency and the role of students to take ownership of their learning. How can we fix this? Can we redesign schools? This is the idea I want to talk about today. Are our education systems designed to promote students' learning? If not, how can we redesign to better reflect what we know about cultivating learning? Without answering these questions, we won't be able to reform education in a more meaningful way. As a teacher, a school leader, researcher, policy analyst, and now as the director of research at the World Innovation Summit for Education, what I've come to learn is that the human connection is fundamental to learning, and now more than ever. Especially, it has been more evident in the last 15 months of school disruption caused by the COVID-19 crisis. And without strong soft skills competencies, including personal learning, personal agency, social-emotional learning, resilience, grit, the academic hard skills will decline greatly. My point here is soft skills and hard skills need to complement each other. Thus, if the most important element in teaching and learning is the human component and helping students to cultivate their essential life skills to thrive in an uncertain world, how do we change the role of students? How do we make learning more relevant to them? Because in our current traditional model, when we create content and curriculum, what we do, we don't involve them as we should. We do the work for them instead of doing the work with them. We also prioritize the acquisition of knowledge rather than the acquisition of experience. Because when we do that, we forgot the following. Number one, they have a natural interest about learning and about the world. They want to learn. Number two, they are diverse learners. They learn differently. And number three, they are intentional learners. They are motivated to learn. In the earlier story about my daughter and about her learning, she was passionate, interested, and motivated. Because when students pursue what they are good at, what is relevant to them, and their learning, you don't need to motivate them. You just need to support and guide them. And this is the type of experiential learning we want to introduce in our schools so we can improve learning outcomes and close the achievement gaps. We need to ask about ourselves if the current what, how, and why of teaching and learning serves our students and our world well. The important question here, how do we decide what is good learning? How do we transform our education from the acquiring of knowledge into learner-driven, personalized learning? Let me repeat that again. Learner-driven, personalized learning. That's the type of learning we need to introduce. What should schooling, teaching, and most importantly, learning look like in this rapidly changing world? So to redesign schools, we need to rethink about the whole child, to develop the skills needed to guide and inform the redesign of the learning with them rather than for them. So we need to move to a learner-guided reform. To explain that concept more, number one, learners are at the center of teaching and learning. Social and emotional learning is so important to learning. And finally, recognizing individual differences and assess for learning rather than assess of learning. So the concept I'm introducing here today, learner-guided reform, and the definition is so simple. Learning is best measured by student demonstrating their learning rather than the number of hours spent in a classroom, which is the traditional model. The curriculum is what we teach. Pedagogy is how we teach. And we need to frame and look at these two as a one design piece, and at the center of this is learner's agency. Learner's agency means learners must have ownership and control over their pathway and drive their own learning. How do we get there? Of course, changing curriculum is hard. Changing assessment is hard. And changing school philosophy and organizations to focus on learners' agency is even harder. But proudly, I want to say that this is part of a project I've been leading for the last 18 months in the Innovation Hub project at Qatar Foundation. To translate this theory into practice, the Innovation Hub is a platform and a network of experts, designers, researchers. Their responsibility is to set up an innovation hub inside each school. And the lab serves as a research and design unit, as an R&D unit to identify areas to focus and mainly to support the capacity building for teachers, for school leaders in their approach for design and for innovation, and to have deep change and transformation. We have started this project early 2020, before COVID-19, in 2 schools in Qatar and 1 school in Australia. And in fact, this project has implications for schools globally. And it has been fascinating to see the growth of each school, because each school has its own unique journey to innovation. And I also believe that this COVID crisis has been, in some sorts, a great positive disruptor, because it forced the schools to innovate and also helped them to realize that a drastic change in education was possible. Working in this area for more than 20 years, it has been great to see the movement in education in redesigning schools. Because I do believe that real reform is more than a combination of quick fixes. We need to focus on the causes of improving schools, which is the learner's agency. It's about fundamental change. It's about focusing on the human component, identifying root causes, and redesigning models that supports learners' agency and empowerment. To conclude my speech today with the 3 points, to redesign schools, number 1, we need to redesign the education system around actual student learning and experience rather than the number of hours spent in the classroom. Number 2, we need to move toward learners-guided reform, where the learner's competency development is at the heart, at the core of what we teach and how we teach. And finally, research and design should be the engine to improve any school.